December 16, 1944, dawned cold and gray over the Ardennes. Snow fell silently over dense forests, covering the frozen roads and scattered villages in a deceptive calm. Beneath that blanket, a storm was gathering. The Germans had launched their last desperate gamble, a massive offensive aimed at splitting the American lines, seizing Antwerp, and forcing a negotiated peace in the west. Bastogne, a small Belgian town, lay directly in the path of their advance, its significance hidden in its network of converging roads, the arteries of movement and supply. The 101st Airborne Division, fewer than 20,000 strong, found themselves encircled. Snow clung to their foxholes and coats, and the cold gnawed at every exposed hand and face. Ammunition was running low, food scarce, and morale strained by the sheer weight of the enemy pressing from all sides. Yet they held. Patrols skirmished through snowdrifts, artillery crews hauled shells over frozen ground, and medics worked tirelessly amidst the chaos. Every man understood that surrender was not an option, but the pressure of isolation weighed heavily. In Luxembourg, General Eisenhower pored over the latest reports, tension etched into his features. He had faced crises before, but the speed and audacity of the German advance shook even him. They're holding. But for how long, he thought. Every hour counts. Every delay risks collapse. Across the forest, General George S. Patton's Third Army waited, poised to strike. Known for his ruthlessness and unrelenting speed, Patton understood the stakes. Bastogne was not just another town, it was the hinge on which the northern flank of the Allies could swing. His officers gathered around the map, boots crunching in the frozen mud, breath misting in the icy air. Patton's gaze swept over every marker and contour. "Gentlemen," he said, voice firm, "I don't want to hear about impossible. We move. We drive. We fight. The 101st doesn't surrender on my watch." The town's roads, barely navigable under snow, made resupply and movement treacherous. German forces were advancing from all sides, their columns cutting through the forest with deadly precision. Yet the defenders dug in, determined to hold every street, every intersection. It was a clash not just of men, but of strategy, endurance, and sheer willpower. In his tent, Eisenhower scribbled notes by lamplight, shadows flickering across maps as snow pressed against the canvas walls. "Hold Bastogne. Whatever it takes, they cannot fall," he murmured to himself. The stage was set, the forest silent but watchful, the winter harsh and unyielding. In those snowbound streets, encircled by the enemy, courage would be tested, leadership challenged, and the fate of an army teetered on the edge. The countdown had begun. By December 17th, Bastogne was fully encircled. The roads that once carried reinforcements and supplies were now nothing more than frozen corridors for the enemy. Snow piled high along the hedgerows, and the bitter wind cut through wool and leather, leaving soldiers shivering, teeth chattering, fingers stiff and numb. The 101st Airborne had dug in, foxholes carved from frozen earth, every position firing, probing, resisting. But the situation was dire. Rations had dwindled to a few scraps of canned food. Medical supplies were minimal, ammunition was slipping below critical levels, and every man understood the desperate truth: without relief, Bastogne would fall in days. Artillery shells screamed through the sky in jagged arcs, splintering trees and ripping frozen earth. The sound was deafening, punctuated by the relentless crack of small arms fire. Patrols moved cautiously, returning with reports of German patrols pressing closer, sometimes only a few hundred yards from the center of town. Inside command posts, radio operators were frantically sending and receiving messages, but many lines had been severed, and the cold was beginning to freeze equipment. Eisenhower sat in his command tent in Luxembourg, maps spread across the table, the lamp casting long, flickering shadows over the terrain of the Ardennes. He had hoped, as all commanders do, that luck might soften the edge of disaster. But luck had not arrived. The intelligence was grim. The 101st could not hold out more than 4 days without relief. He knew it and hated the thought. "Patton," he muttered to himself, pacing. "There's no one else. There's only Patton." The name carried weight, urgency, and a calculated risk. The Third Army was far forward, not yet fully resupplied, the roads barely navigable under snow and ice. To order them forward meant pushing men and machines to the limit, forcing the impossible. Yet Eisenhower understood that in war, sometimes impossible was the only choice. Across the forest, Patton was awake before dawn, reviewing his maps with staff. Reports had come in, fragmented but clear. Bastogne's defenders were surrounded, supplies low, morale straining but unbroken. "They hold," he said, voice rough with determination, "but not for long. We move at first light. Nothing will stop us." His officers nodded, eyes wide, absorbing the gravity of the order. Every movement had to be calculated, roads cleared, armor concentrated, artillery support synchronized. One misstep could spell disaster for the Third Army and for the men they were about to relieve. Hitler, meanwhile, had issued orders that the encirclement be tightened, no surrender permitted, and that Bastogne be taken by the end of the week. For the 101st, every day mattered. Every hour was a test of endurance. Inside their defensive lines, soldiers whispered to each other, voices low and tense, recounting family stories or promises they intended to keep. Letters they had written home sat in pockets, unread, their paper curling from damp and cold. Eisenhower returned to his map, staring at the network of snowbound roads and German positions. "We have 4 days," he thought. 4 days and then. The sentence hung in his mind, unfinished, heavy with consequence. Communications crackled intermittently, urgent messages arrived from Bastogne, requests for artillery, ammunition, medical evacuation. Every call was a reminder of the human stakes behind the strategy. He wrote a brief note to Patton, concise but loaded: "Move. Relief Bastogne. Do not fail." It was the only hope. In the town itself, men shivered in their foxholes, huddled around improvised fires, watching the forest edges for shadows of enemy movement. Snow muffled footsteps but did not mask the tension. Every man, from the youngest private to the hardened officers, understood the narrow window of survival. They could endure 4 more days, maybe 5, but only if the Third Army broke through. Bastogne had become more than a town. It was a test of courage, a crucible of leadership, a frozen heartbeat in the larger war. Patton's Third Army began its pivot on the morning of December 18th, turning nearly 90 degrees from their current axis of advance. The men were exhausted, boots soaked in slush, engines straining to crawl over snow-packed roads. The blizzard had settled in overnight, blanketing the Ardennes in a white haze that swallowed distance and masked every obstacle. Tanks plowed through icy ruts, artillery convoys creaked under heavy loads, and trucks carrying ammunition skidded dangerously close to the frozen ditches. Every mile felt like 10, every turn of the wheel a battle against weather as much as the enemy. Eisenhower watched the progress reports with a growing sense of urgency. Every hour brought a new update, often incomplete, sometimes contradictory. "Maximum effort," he muttered, staring at the map littered with unit positions and markers of German resistance. "The 101st cannot hold much longer." His hands were restless, tapping on the edge of the table, pacing back and forth between radios. Snowstorm or not, every frozen hour counted. Each delay at a choke point, whether a collapsed bridge or stalled tank, threatened to extend the window beyond the 101st's endurance. The soldiers of the Third Army were pushing their limits. Drivers wrapped in layers of clothing, faces frostbitten, guided half-frozen vehicles along narrow tracks. Engineers labored to clear snow-blocked roads, sometimes digging for hours under near-zero temperatures. Communications were erratic, radios cut out, and messengers struggled through drifts taller than themselves. Yet Patton's voice echoed through the chain of command, unyielding: "I've got the men moving. We will break through." It was not bravado. It was a promise, a command, a lifeline to the men awaiting relief in Bastogne. Inside the encircled town, the 101st Airborne held their positions with grim determination. Snow clung to helmets, rifles frosted over, and ice cracked beneath every hurried step. Soldiers scouted the forest edges, skirting German patrols that probed the defenses with small arms and artillery harassment. Supplies continued to dwindle, rations reduced to a single meal, water nearly frozen in canteens. Medics worked furiously, treating frostbite and injuries from both enemy fire and the bitter winter. Men whispered to one another, recounting home memories, offering quiet encouragement, each hour a fragile victory. Back on the roads leading to Bastogne, tanks groaned under their heavy burdens, their tracks biting into ice and snow. Column after column crawled forward, headlights cutting through the blizzard, illuminating frozen trees and crumbling walls. Mechanical failures slowed progress, engines overheated, treads snapped, and fuel supplies ran dangerously low. Officers relayed orders via radios sputtering with static: adjust formations, conserve fuel, prepare for German counterattacks. At every intersection, reconnaissance vehicles scouted the terrain, reporting German artillery emplacements and ambush points. The blizzard was a double-edged sword. It concealed movement, but it also reduced visibility to mere yards, increasing the risk of miscalculation. Eisenhower's tent was a flurry of activity. A constant stream of dispatches arrived, some scribbled in haste by exhausted couriers, others crackling over the radio lines. He studied each one, weighing the chances of success against the fragility of Bastogne's defenses. Every mile matters, he thought, heart pounding. Delay by an hour, and men may die. He scribbled notes and sent brief messages to Patton, urging speed, urging persistence. The weather alternated between relentless snowfall and fleeting blinding sun, creating a shifting landscape that wore down both men and machines. Soldiers of the 101st spotted German reconnaissance units through snow haze, exchanging fire when possible, holding their lines by every means available. Inside Bastogne, morale was tested as temperatures dipped further, and every hour felt like an eternity. Outside, the Third Army's columns pressed forward relentlessly, day bleeding into night, night giving way to another white dawn. Exhaustion was universal, but the purpose unshakable: to break the siege before hope itself froze in the Ardennes. Patton reviewed the maps constantly, tracing the path through villages, forests, and frozen rivers. He coordinated artillery to suppress German positions, ordered fuel drops where roads were impassable, and pushed every soldier to maintain momentum. "The 101st is counting on us," he said, voice steady despite the storm. "We will not let them down." As hours stretched and temperatures fell, the army advanced, inch by inch, toward the encircled paratroopers. Every mile was a struggle, every vehicle a testament to human endurance, and every moment a reminder that the race against time had only just begun. On the morning of December 26, 1944, the blizzard began to lift over Bastogne. Through a gray, diffused light, the first glint of armored steel appeared on the horizon. Tanks from Patton's Third Army plowed through snowdrifts, their engines roaring, tracks carving furrows in the frozen roads. Soldiers of the 101st Airborne, exhausted, frostbitten, and wary, caught sight of the approaching columns. For a moment, disbelief froze them more than the winter wind. Relief had arrived. Shouts went up, muffled by the snow and the sound of artillery fire fading as German resistance faltered. The first contact was cautious, tense. Patton's scouts advanced, meeting rifle fire from German pockets along the perimeter, but they held, securing pathways for the main armored units. The 101st poured out from dugouts and snow-covered foxholes, eyes wide, faces breaking into smiles that quickly turned to tears. Men ran toward the tanks, clambered onto tracks, clasped the hands of the soldiers who had made it possible. Artillerymen lowered their pieces for the first time in days, exhausted but unbroken, their guns cold and silent. Snow fell softly on this improbable scene of human endurance and operational brilliance. Patton's aides relayed word to Eisenhower immediately. In his tent, the Supreme Allied commander felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He reached for the radio, voice steady but trembling with emotion. "George," he said, "tell me it's true. Tell me Bastogne is relieved." On the other end, Patton's calm, confident tone returned the relief, the understatement of a soldier who had always led from the front. "Just doing my job, Ike," he said. "The men did the real work." Eisenhower's hand shook as he grasped the receiver, a rare crack in the armor of a man accustomed to bearing burdens silently. "No, George, you moved an army 90 degrees in a blizzard," he said, voice thick. "You saved 10,000 lives. That's why you're invaluable." For a long moment, silence fell across the line. Then Eisenhower exhaled, closing his eyes, and tears slid unnoticed down his cheeks. The relief, the gratitude, the immense weight of command finally found a release. Maps lay spread across his desk, letters from worried families unopened, and yet nothing mattered more than knowing those men had survived. In Bastogne, the streets were a scene of joy and disbelief. Soldiers hugged, clasped each other's shoulders, and helped carry the wounded to safety. Supply trucks arrived, breaking through snow-blocked avenues, distributing rations, medical aid, and ammunition. Tanks opened the corridors through the frozen town, clearing rubble and snipers alike, establishing a lifeline that would secure Bastogne for the Allies. German forces withdrew in the face of the relentless American advance, their morale shaken by the unyielding resistance and sudden arrival of Patton's army. Amidst it all, Patton moved among his men, checking positions, offering quiet praise, and ensuring order even in triumph. Snow caked on boots and helmets, frost on faces, but eyes sparkled with determination and pride. Soldiers looked to him not just as a commander, but as a symbol of hope, a man who had led them through impossible terrain, impossible weather, and against formidable opposition. He smiled faintly at the sight of reunited comrades and whispered encouragement. "Keep moving," he said. "This isn't the end, this is only the next step." The winter sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the scene, soldiers embracing, tanks cutting through snow, and smoke curling from the remaining German positions. The town, once a frozen trap, had become a testament to leadership, courage, and coordination. Each man understood the cost, the struggle, the hours spent inching forward against nature and the enemy. Eisenhower, sitting in his office hours later, held a map in one hand and a letter from a family in the other. He traced the route Patton's Third Army had taken, the 90-degree pivot through the blizzard, the towns and forests crossed, the men who had endured freezing roads and mechanical failures to reach Bastogne in time. Gratitude and admiration washed over him. He knew history would remember the 101st for its courage, but he also knew that without Patton's brilliance and audacity, this victory might never have been possible. Somewhere between maps and letters, the enormity of what had just been achieved settled in. Leadership, heroism, and human endurance had converged in a moment that would echo far beyond the Ardennes. The winter of 1944 had begun to loosen its grip on the Ardennes. Snow glinted along the frozen roads of Bastogne, sunlight catching the armor of tanks and the helmets of soldiers, now free from encirclement. Inside a quiet tent, Eisenhower sat alone, the remnants of maps spread across the table, letters stacked in careful piles. Pen in hand, he began to write in his private diary, the words deliberate, weighed with the gravity of command. December 26th. Bastogne has been relieved. The 101st Airborne endured what no man should ever face. Their courage, their endurance, extraordinary. But it was Patton who made the impossible possible. Without his audacity, thousands would have been lost. Letters followed. To Patton, brief but laden with respect, "George, your leadership in moving the Third Army through the blizzard saved lives, preserved the line, and upheld the honor of our forces. I am in your debt." To Churchill, he conveyed the operational brilliance, the speed, and the coordination that had turned the tide in the Ardennes. To General Marshall, he outlined the human and logistical triumph, emphasizing that courage alone had not won this victory, but courage coupled with decisive action and trust in one's men. The Battle of the Bulge had been halted, its momentum broken. Bastogne, once a frozen trap, had become a symbol of resistance, ingenuity, and sacrifice. Eisenhower reflected on the broader implications, a turning point in a desperate winter, a testament to how leadership under pressure could bend circumstances, not break them. He thought of every private, every medic, every commander who had endured 4 days of near-impossible isolation, and realized that operational excellence was inseparable from human courage. Maps and letters lay before him, yet the most important victories were those etched into memory, in the hearts and minds of men who faced fear without flinching. Outside, Bastogne streets were alive with quiet celebration. Soldiers shared laughter, embraced one another, and helped carry the wounded to safety. Tanks gleamed in the sun, plowing through melting snow, clearing roads for supplies and reinforcements. The town, once a crucible of endurance, now breathed with the quiet dignity of survival. Yet beneath the relief lay the lesson of leadership: trust your subordinates, act decisively, and balance audacity with care for human life. Eisenhower, observing from afar, understood that the essence of command was not just strategy, but the courage to make choices when every option carried risk. In his diary, he added, "History will record the positions, the movements, the strategies. But the human decisions, the courage, the audacity, the willingness to act under unimaginable pressure, these are the true markers of leadership." He imagined the soldiers of the 101st, huddled around fires, smiles breaking through the exhaustion, and he thought of Patton moving through snow and ice, steadfast in purpose, every decision a calculated risk that had become a lifeline. As the sun began to set over Bastogne, glinting off the armor and the snow, Eisenhower closed his diary and leaned back, letting the silence of the winter forest fill the room. Letters were stacked, maps folded, but the weight of human effort lingered in the air. He understood that victories were more than statistics. They were moments where courage, brilliance, and human drama intersected, defining not just history, but the men who made it. The camera panned slowly over Bastogne, soldiers celebrating, tanks gleaming, snow reflecting the fading light, before fading to Eisenhower alone at his maps, the wind whispering through the tent. History remembers the victories, but the human decisions, the audacity, and the courage define true leadership.